Hey church, and welcome to this week's small group. Now we're still in this series about goals, and this last Sunday we asked the question, why would God be interested in our petty little goals? And the answer is, accomplishing goals is an opportunity to show that God cares. And so I'd like to start out our small group with a couple of negative questions. Have you ever set a goal that backfired? Share the example with your small group. And what are the reasons why God might allow a goal to backfire? Last week we read about Moses' self-doubt when God confronted him with this God-sized goal. You remember Moses was saying, "Why me? God, you should pick someone else." Well, this week we're going to see that Moses has a plan to accomplish God's goals. I'm just going to go ask Pharaoh for a 3-day weekend to go worship God with the nation of Israel. This wasn't an unreasonable request after all, because Pharaoh believed in all kinds of gods. And surely he would not want to offend our God. But we're actually going to see that this goal backfired. Here's a question for you. How does God's goals backfire? Remember, before we read these passages, that whenever we see in the Old Testament capital L-O-R-D, Lord, that was originally in the original Hebrew, Yahweh. It was the personal name of God. So this is what I want you to do. As you're reading through these passages, whenever you see capital L-O-R-D, instead of saying Lord, say Yahweh. And I think that this is going to help you to understand the passage a little bit deeper. Read Exodus chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. Why do you think Pharaoh was unwilling to grant their simple request? And how do you think it felt to be completely dismissed by Pharaoh? And what temptation do we face when people dismiss our goals as foolish or ridiculous? We don't know all of the reasons why Pharaoh denied their request. Maybe he had a deadline. Maybe he felt that if he gave in, that they would see him as weak. Maybe he thought that they wouldn't come back from their 3-day weekend of worshiping Yahweh. Whatever the reason, he clearly did not fear this Yahweh. After all, how powerful could this God be? Because this God's own people were helpless slaves under Pharaoh. I know that when someone I look up to dismisses my goals, I question if I can even accomplish the goal. And my temptation is to give up. But if you think this story is bad, it's going to get worse. Read Exodus chapter 5, verses 6 through 11. Why do you think Pharaoh responded in this way? And why do some people in our lives actively try to crush our goals? At the end of the day, I think Pharaoh was afraid. He was afraid that they would come up with another way to go worship their God, that they wouldn't need Pharaoh anymore. I think most people who actively try to crush our goals are afraid too. Our success threatens them in some way, but the truth of the matter is, in God's kingdom, there's enough room for everyone to have success. Next, I want you to read Exodus chapter 5, verses 12 through 18. How do you think the Israelite foreman felt about Moses through all of this? And have you ever hesitated to make a goal for fear that it would affect other people? Explain. I'm going to make a confession to you. I really didn't want to start the Pulse of Miami Church because I was afraid of failure. Not just for myself, but for the other people that I had to ask to get involved. What if we failed? People left their churches to come help us to start the Pulse of Miami Church. And the weight of that failure almost kept me from saying yes to God. Michelle and I are taking some risks right now with our finances. And something that held me back was, what if we fail? And how will it impact our children if we're broke? But you know what? You know what pushed me through? What would the reward be to others? What if the Pulse succeeded? What if people said yes to Jesus in our church, and the people that came from other churches got to be a part of watching other people come to know Jesus? How awesome would that be? And when it came to our finances, if we never try, how will that impact our children? See, we always think about how our failure would impact our children, but what is the effect of never trying to begin with? I would rather be broke and inspire my kids to take chances and to teach them to live life to the fullest instead of being comfortable and never trying anything. Next, I want you to read Exodus chapter 5, verses 19 through 23. And I also want you to read the first verse of the next chapter, chapter 6, verse 1. How do you think Moses felt when he saw that his goals had backfired so spectacularly? And what did Moses do right? In verse 21, the goal was over. This thing is impossible. It's not going to happen. And I'm sure in Moses' heart, it was over. But what I want you to see is that in that moment of greatest weakness and defeat, Moses turned to God. And for those of us who know the rest of this story, it's then that it gets interesting. I want to close with these two questions. Why did God allow them to experience utter defeat before intervening? And what might God be doing in your life when He allows a goal to backfire? After you answer these two questions, close in prayer and ask God to help us through the disappointments and the backfires on our way to achieving our goals for this year. Remember, accomplishing goals is an opportunity to show that God cares. Have a great rest of your small group, and we'll see you on Sunday.